Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass program, Fired Up. This is a free program that is open to the public on the first Friday of each month. I am Demetra Theophanis, president of the Art Alliance and your host today, and I'm very excited for our program with UK artist Amanda Simmons. We have these Fired Up programs on the first Friday, and so if you miss them and you are unable to attend, please know that you can always go to the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass YouTube channel, and you can find all of our Fired Up programs for the last couple of years and enjoy them whenever you like. Also, if you enjoy the program today and would like to see a broader scope about topics in glass, we also have meetup programs for AACG members only that are on the other Fridays of the month. So the second, third, and fourth Friday of the month, we have Zooms for our members. Those all get put into a digital library on our website. And so members have private access and you can go in with your password and watch them at any time. So again, if you're interested and would like to look into that, you can visit our homepage, aacgglass.org, and consider joining AACG. All right, I'd now like to introduce Amanda Simmons, our guest artist today, who works with gravity and the kiln to create some really phenomenal and unique work. Amanda, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, I have some information to read about our sponsors today. And our first sponsor is Rago Wright Auctions. They are a network of independently owned art and design brands with a national coast-to-coast presence, united by shared clientele, technology, innovation, and creativity, alongside expertise and shared passion. As the market leader in contemporary glass, Rago Wright has over 3 decades of experience, hosting more than 25 auctions dedicated to 20th century glass, with sales exceeding 10 million for contemporary works alone. Rago has established numerous world auction records, including William Morris's Beatles with Flora vase at $390,000 in May 2024, as well as Dale Chihuly's Persian ceiling installation, which went for $200,000 in January 2022, and Tutzinski's piece, which went for close to $70,000 in February of this year. Rago also features works by other glass visionaries such as Lino Tagliapietra, Yoichi Ohira, Laura de Santillana, and Preston Singletary. So to learn more, you can visit their website, ragoarts.com. Our second sponsor for this program is Vessel Gallery. Vessel Gallery is the authority on contemporary art glass, ceramics, and craft. Based in London since 1999, specializing in museum quality sculptural artworks, showcasing the best of British and international creative talents. All pieces are unique or limited edition and have been carefully edited to show an unparalleled selection of contemporary design and craft. The gallery has been representing Amanda Simmons for over a decade. And our last sponsor is Bullseye Glass. Bullseye Glass is pleased to sponsor this presentation from AACG. Bullseye doesn't just produce colored glass for artists and makers, they also offer live online classes to help people everywhere learn to succeed with kiln glass. Visit classes.bullseyeglass.com to register for workshops with artists like Amanda Simmons, Morgan Madison, Ian Chadwick, and more. And if you're feeling intrepid and inspired to jump right in, try Delicate Disco with Amanda Simmons, a 4-session online class that starts tomorrow, June 7th. You might also consider joining Amanda for Tall Vessels, a 2-session live online class that begins on August 9th. So again, visit classes.bullseyeglass.com and you can get all of the information to join Amanda for that. All right, thank you so much to our sponsors, and please go ahead, Amanda. We're excited to have you here today.
Excellent. Thank you ever so much for the invite, and thank you to all those sponsors. That's brilliant. It's great to see. So I'm just going to give you a little background history of how I got to glass. And I thought with this talk I'd focus on the residencies that I've done over the years, which have really led to kind of quite big bodies of work and have been really instrumental in kind of building my my glasswork. So I'm based in southwest Scotland. I did all my glass training down in London. So we relocated up here in about 2005. Previously, I was a British telecom engineer. So I left school as an engineer, worked for them for quite a few years, but then decided I really wanted to work with people. So I went and did a biomedical degree and came up with a pharmacology and toxicology degree. But then ended up working for a few years as a clinical perfusionist. So I've done quite a lot of things before I got to glass. Those were my two main careers. But I started with glass on a 1 week intensive stained glass course. Like many people who get into glass, we go the cold route first. And that was great until I found fused glass, and that was it. We did a little tiny bit of melting on that stained glass course, and within 3 months I'd set myself up in my mum's garage and started fused glass. So I did a lot of kind of learning through 6-week courses at a place at Westminster College in London. And that took me through fusing, slumping, casting, mould making, and cold working. So it was a brilliant apprenticeship in glass. I didn't really want to do another undergraduate, as I had to do another degree for my perfusion work. So I ended up going to Central St Martin's in London to do a postgraduate certificate in glass and architecture, thinking that I was going to be a little bit more of a practical glass artist, as I really love fixing things and understanding how things work. So I thought I would be working together with teams and kind of working in glass with that way. But when we relocated to southwest Scotland, and this is my country, this is my countryside around me. I'm very, very lucky. It's quite remote. I live right in the middle of the region here, and so it became more a better route to be a gallery-based artist. And by that time, I'd kind of discovered vessel forming, and I put my blinkers on, and I just have been playing with that technique since about 2006 when I started my studio. So it's been quite a long time I've been working with this technique. Mostly nowadays work with powder and vessel forms. So I started with the sheet glass forms and making very tall, kind of thin pieces. But a lot of my subject matter is about birds. This was a piece I did for the Bullseye Emerge Evolve exhibition. This one was called 4 and 20. And it was a real memorial to all the dead birds that were on the roads up here after leaving London and coming into a very rural area. It was quite disturbing at the time. And so this is based on the 4 and 20, the Blackbird poem. But I love to work with powders. I love how they're quite organic. You can bring a lot of light into them and make very lightweight vessels. This was what I was struggling with the sheet glass form. So I switched to powders in about 2011. And that was quite monumental through a residency that I'll talk to you in a little while. Over the years, I think I've built up quite a lot of galleries. I don't have so many now. Since the pandemic, I came down to about 2 or 3. And as I was building that gallery career, I like to change a lot. And I think because I was a previous scientist, I'm always experimenting. Glass for me, the process and the technique is all about trying to get glass to do what I want it to do, not what it wants it to do. So a lot of my work is kind of, 1 to 2 millimeters thick. I really like to to get the work as thin and as lightweight as I can. And so using powders front and back on a very thin 3mm sheet of Tecta, that's the bullseye clear glass, and then making them slump quite largely, which then reduces that thickness of the vessels. I always like to remind myself where I am in terms of building bodies of work and really trying to change, but not to change too much. Galleries, they kind of like us to stay the same, especially if we're selling well. They don't really want to see a huge amount of difference come through the door. But I've been very lucky over the years that I've had really good supportive galleries, and within the confines of the vessel form that I work with have allowed me to kind of experiment and really kind of understand what I'm doing with this technique. I mean, I've been working with glass for 23 years now, 22 years, 23. And, I don't want to sit and do the same thing over and over again. I left two very good careers in engineering and my perfusion work. And I think the glass had to really kind of start to mean something to me. As a previous scientist, I do lots of experimentation and research before I actually get to the glass. So this includes drawing, painting, printmaking, model making, anything that will help me understand what I'm trying to do with patterns and layering of colour and how the light is going to come through where I draw into the glass. So there's a lot of thinking before I even get to the studio. This image is always kind of summed up, I would say probably for the last 20 years, of what I've been trying to achieve. I love the idea that glass is, we've always been told it's fragile and don't break it and be careful. And I kind of like to push that. I like my galleries to be slightly worried that I have these forms that spin, and they always have a point of balance, though. I worked with a fantastic photographer from his, and he kind of just picked it up and put it right on the edge of that plinth. But it has this balance. And the idea that I'm making marks on both sides of the vessels, they're always different. And I'm always bringing different colour and pattern into the work, and then working with how that light is going to come through. So residencies, I was very lucky I won an award in, I think it was 2010, when I was showing at Origin, which is the British Craft Council's, used to be their kind of one of the bigger shows for artists to go to. And I won an award to go and investigate an overseas market. I've always loved America. I've always looked at it in terms of its creativity and what goes on in all the arts there, and especially the glass world. At that point, 20 odd years ago, the kiln forming wasn't as well known in the UK. So I was always looking over to America and the artists there. And from the very first time that I had a kiln, I've always used bullseye glass. I love the range of colours and the support for artists that they give. So I met Lani and Dan from Bullseye in, I think it was 2010 when I went over to meet them. And at that point, they were linking with Richard Parrish and Steve Klein, who have been doing these residencies around the world. They've Pilchard, Northlands in Scotland, which I'm going to talk about, all sorts of places actually. I think they've been to Santa Fe in Norway. But Lani very, very kindly invited me to take part in that residency. And so the residency was 2011 at Northlands, which is unfortunately no longer exists. It was up at the top of the northeast Scotland, and it was a wonderful place, really, really difficult to get to. But people came from all over the world to kind of get together and enjoy glass, basically. So the residency, I think there was about 10 or 11 of us. A few Brits, but quite a lot of American artists. Sarah, who's working with AACG, was there. I met Sarah for the first time. All sorts. I think Morgan Madison was on that. Carmen Vetta was. Oh gosh, lots more names. It was really scary for me being a scientist, and I was sitting around the table with all these artists, and I've always found the technique easy for glass because I've come from physics and chemistry and engineering. I kind of understand how these things work. And I found it a really easy language to work with. But I've struggled with the art side because I was a trained scientist. So it was really a great opportunity to just to sit around with other artists and to work out what it was or what I needed to be to kind of take my work on to another level. So the 2011 residency there was a real pivoting point for me in my practice. I think I made one piece of glass, and that was really only to show someone about a drop. Everyone else is doing these amazing samples and kind of really making use of the facilities. I just wanted to think. So I just sat and drew and discovered all the land around Northlands. It's an amazing place. It has kind of 360-degree views. It's like the islands in Scotland that have no trees. And it's also the lowlands of the Highlands, if that makes sense. You go through the Highlands first, and then it's very flat. So all these skyscapes and vistas were just right on the doorstep. Steve Klein and myself used to stand at the end of the road near the harbour and look out at this view every morning before going in and just watching that silver line on the light across the water. It was just beautiful. The thing that really came from the residency was confidence. It made me actually think that I could progress in what I was doing, and became quite really kind of started to focus on larger scale work. This was building a piece for showing at SOFA Chicago. Very lucky to be picked by an organisation here in Scotland called Craft Scotland, who work from hobbyists right up to top professionals in the craft world in Scotland, and offer a lot of opportunities. And this one, they took I think there's about 13 of us over to the SOFA Chicago, which I'm sure many of you know. I think it's called something different now. But it's a huge show. It's a huge show for glass. And I had to up my game. I was working quite small at that point. So I knew that I had to make some larger scale work. So this was the beginning of that work. And at this point, I'm working within my own kiln. I've got a big flatbed kiln. I'm doing the blank in the kiln, but then I needed to move on and slump this in a bigger kiln. So I worked on the blank. This has had about 4 firings. So I'm flipping over. I've got this middle kind of quite bold design going through. That's kind of encased into the glass in the middle. And then the other sides, I'm adding more layers of colour and pattern. So because I wanted this to be quite a big piece, I went over to the National Glass Centre in Sunderland, which has a huge range of kilns. This one's called Baby. And I think they're being sarcastic because it's absolutely massive kiln. This piece had a 75 centimetre length of aperture, and it was about 50 centimetres across. And it still had a lot to go, but they kind of kicked me out at 9 p.m. as I was watching the slump. So it was great, but very difficult to actually get out of the kiln because I'd built all these kiln posts and that around it. But luckily someone came and helped me get it out of the kiln. Never mind. Starting to work cold work on this. This was the biggest piece I'd ever made in my whole glass career. So I was a wee bit nervous. And that was the finished piece. It was slightly different to what I had planned. I wanted a more of an oval form that was going to sit and look at you. But I'm sure you all know working with glass doesn't always go the way that you want it to. But with some very clever cold working, I kind of made it work. And this just to give you a sense of scale. Unfortunately, I had a mini stroke when I first started working with glass. And it turns out that silica can be a trigger for autoimmune disorders. And it was one thing that I learned on that residency as well. There was an American artist, Gloria Adena, who was doing a talk on refractory mold making. And she kind of slipped it in when she was teaching us about how these elements in those things that we use for molds can cause autoimmune disorders. So I found out then that silica was actually not making me very well. So it was quite a difficult time, and I worked through it. So this is all the kit that I wear when I'm in the studio. I'm keeping myself as covered as possible, like we do with glass anyway, but I just have to take a little bit more caution, and I've been okay ever since. So it was a bit of a wobbly time at that point. So there's me out in the back of my garden, playing spaceman, sort of trying to work through these issues and how I'm going to continue as a glass artist. So I did that work for Sofa Chicago, and then probably went off and worked on other aspects of my practice. But in 2017, I was asked to do my first solo show at the Scottish Gallery in Edinburgh. And it was really good because even after all those years, I was still working on ideas and designs that had come from that residency. It was only 10 days, but it was so intense and really set me off as an artist, I would say. It was the first time I actually started calling myself that. So this was work all inspired by the colours around Northlands and the Scottish nature. And the birds as well. I can't ever keep away from birds. I'm very lucky. I've got a nest, a swallow's nest in my studio. And one day, as they're building the nest, they line it with feathers. And one just dropped down onto my workbench. And it was a complete revelation. It was just beautiful. So I started doing a lot of this feather-based work. And this is my Northlands platter. I love it suits bullseye glass down to a T up at Northlands because of the ranges of greys and whites and creams that they do within their palette. Suit Scotland very well. But then I'm bringing in some lovely bright colours from the lichen that are on all the stone walls around there, up there. So another residency up in Scotland. This was a few years later, in about 2015. And this is a non-glass art centre, but they wanted someone that would work with scientists. So it was a pilot kind of residency where I would come and go and work with scientists at the Environmental Research Institute in Thurso. This is Leicester Harbour. This is where Northlands Glass used to be, but just showing you some of the amazing vistas of Scotland and why I love this place so much. And this was the view from the residency house that I stayed in. So just watching these skies go by, and they're changing constantly. And this led to a new body of work whilst investigating the flow country. So the flow country is the biggest blanket bog in the world and holding more carbon dioxide than all the trees and forests in the whole of the UK. It's a really highly significant scientific space, but it's also stunningly beautiful, but quite bleak as well. But so I looked at the patterns these pools make. These are all linked, and all the peat layers are several meters deep underneath here. So some of my printmaking, I use the Japanese woodblock watercolor technique. And so I wasn't working with glass on this residency, so I really kind of focused on more 2D work that would then influence the glass. This definitely helped me get a little bit more organic in my mark making and the way that I use the powders. So normally I'm layering 2 to 3 colours down onto a sheet of glass, and then I'm drawing directly into them. This I wanted to loosen up a little, and working with the printmaking really helped try to work out what I'm going to do with this glass. A little bit of ink and colour that has come from the prints, and led to a body of work called sky forms. So these are about all those big vistas, those big skies up in the north of Scotland. These were the first pieces that I made after the residency when I got back, and then started to build into much bigger works. These are a little duo set in an egg form, and working with those wonderful reactions. So we've got the cyan and French vanilla, and there's some dense white in there too. So there's a lot of reactions going on in this piece and trying to keep them calm. One of the biggest pieces that I can make in my kiln, so this again is about 70 centimetres long and about 49 wide. And the maximum I can get into my kiln at home is about 27 centimetres or 12 inches in your language. And that is my absolute limit. So also with the cold working too, these are quite big pieces. I'm having to do a lot of hand cold working with them on big glass sheets and grits. And then from the biggest to the smallest. So I kind of tend to work at those two scales. I love tiny, tiny little handheld work, and I really like the large scale, but I don't do a huge amount in the middle of them. So moving on a few more years, this is 2019 now. And between those two residencies, I'd kind of been doing a lot of traveling around the world. I've been teaching out in America across all of the Bullseye resource centres. Excuse me. And then I get an invite to Australia. So I've been there about 5 times now, and sort of teaching from Perth and over in Melbourne. So in 2019, I was asked to do a residency before teaching a class there. And this was at Blue Dog Glass in Melbourne. I absolutely love Australia. It's just the most inspirational country. The wildlife, the flowers, how the light hits the land. I mean, it totally changed a lot of my outlook and how I worked with the glass, and definitely brought a lot more colour into my work. I became obsessed, probably still am slightly, but this plant is called a Banksia. There are many different types of Banksias. Look at that lovely blue sky. Don't see that often in Scotland. But they're just amazing plants, and the intricacy of their build. They're all centered around this middle cone, and all these little petals are coming off the cone in these amazing colors and patterns. And for someone who loves making intricate mark making in powders, they were just a pure delight. So I spent a lot of time photographing and drawing and just watching these plants. That's the cone that you get in the middle of the plant. So I was able to bring all this stuff into the studio and play with it. And so how I work, how I build my bodies of work, I work like a mind map. I get a very large sheet of very large sheet of paper, and I get all my ideas down. It's a way for me to kind of understand what I'm thinking about and how a lot of the things that I'm researching are linked. And this way I can get it all down on that piece of paper, and it's just giving me a lot of understanding of the work that I'm looking at. The piece in the middle there is just cardboard. I've just painted on cardboard and drawn onto it. And it's a kind of model for a piece that I've been trying to make for years. I'm hoping it's going to come in the next couple of years. But just one of these difficult flat works that after I've been, a 3D artist for so long, doing 2D work, I find really difficult because I want to give it so much depth. And so I'm still working on this one. Again, some of my scribbles, how I'm trying to join up ideas. And as an artist, I'm trying to create a narrative and trying to tell a story. But it's not very easy with just a vessel form. So I think I probably do a little bit too much research, but it's never wasted. And I do quite often go back and pick up on a separate thread and try to understand what's going on underneath things. I mean, Australia brought in a lot of kind of politics and a lot of the colonialist history that we have with Australia. Also, at the time that I was there, it was the end of 2019, and the fires were started early. And this was the year that led into 2020, where you could see it from satellites that Australia was burning. And then this linked into the Banksias that I'm fascinated with, because they are part of their botany, is that the word? What they need fire. So fire is a way that those cones will open out because they're stuck with resin. Fire will open them out and the seeds will come out and then get distributed through the fire, and then the plant will start re-emerging once the fire's gone. So just kind of starting to link up those ideas. Also, we were having huge political problems in the UK. We were just going through Brexit, and it was just awful. And you just get so frustrated with politicians. And so there isn't just one idea that's going through my work. I'm always bringing in things that are connected. For instance, like the Banksia is named after Joseph Banks, who was on the first boat out to discover Australia. Of course, it was already completely discovered. So I just find it interesting that these things have just gone on for so long. There is still a lot of issues in happening. So that was another short residency, but I again worked through a lot of kind of questions and ideas through that. Not long after that, I was over at the Pittsburgh Glass Centre teaching there. And again, I had another residency before class. So it was another chance to play with more kilns and ideas. And this is me just trying to work as light as I can with the very thin powder wafers and thinking about how those plants are burning. It's the technique is called serotiny, where plants use fire to propagate. These are my cones of protest. So it's something that's reoccurring now. I'm looking at it in the UK here. I'm looking at monocultural forestry at the moment. But the idea started in Australia, and about how plants would protest the Anthropocene, what we're doing to them, So there's all my little rebellion symbols going through these little cones. And that this is just pure powder, so no base glass on here. I'm really fascinated with like very low firing of powders and how we can get texture into them and how thin we can actually work with them as a medium.
I want to step in for a minute, Amanda. We have just a couple questions in the chat. One person wondering if you sometimes use mathematical forms in your work.
No, but I do understand. I think I understand where the question has come from. I think it's not mathematical, but a lot of the things that I'm thinking about with my mark making is, and I've got a body of work to show this. It's about how we're all connected, how every single particle and atom is connected. And my drawing is very linked to that. I'm actually, I really wanted to be I can't think of the word now. A cosmologist, a theoretical cosmologist, that's it. And you need absolutely fantastic maths for that. And I don't have fantastic maths, unfortunately. But no, for me, it's definitely scientific and how we're connected, but not maths exactly. I wish I was better.
Okay. And another quick technical question for you. Do you work on thin fire or shelf primer? For slumping, do you use Ceraboard or ceramic slumping rings? And for the residencies, do you apply or do you contact them directly? So a couple questions in there.
Brilliant. Okay. No, I've forgotten one of them already. So I go between thin fire and fibre paper. I use the two when I'm doing double-sided work because of the permeability to air of the fibre paper and because of the surface finish from the thin fire. So, but if I'm only doing single-sided work, I will just go down on primer. So I'm trying to reduce the materials that I use with my firings. The slumping, I'll use commercial ceramic rings up to a point for kind of smaller scale work, but all my large scale work is made on vermiculite board. It's about a 25mm board, which is highly heat resistant and really easy to work with, like wood. So I cut my apertures out of that and I make my molds. I still have a mold that I made in my first one about 2011. So they're very long lasting if you look after them. And the residencies, I don't think I've applied for any. I think they've all been either invitation or I think the Pittsburgh one was when I donated some work to their Art on Fire, their big yearly fundraising auction. And if you put a piece into that, I think it's similar to Pilchuck. You know, you could get a chance to come and do a residency there. So that was through a donation. And I know Brenda in Australia quite well, so she invited me as a friend. So no, so but you can apply. It's definitely worth looking out up on your artist networks and trying to see what may be in your area or abroad. That's I think there is a very good how it's on Facebook. It's a group. If you searched on Facebook, there's a whole residency site there that comes up with kind of international ones. So.
All right. Thank you very much.
So a lot of drawing again. I'm working with layers and layers here, which I love the look of, but I don't like the end solidness of the glass. So I'm looking into ways of trying to build these extra layers of powders without having the mass of the sheet glass there. So I'm aware of the time. I shall speed up a little. So this is one of the pieces I was working with in Pittsburgh. And this was the piece that I donated into the Art on Fire auction. And then getting back home, I can go straight into the workshop and start working on all the ideas that I've been working away with on residency. So this is the Australia work where you've got those bright contrasting colours going on and building them into quite over the top colourful pieces. But I think that's what Australia is. So it's kind of bringing the heart of Australia out at the same time. Back to very tiny, small scale work. But yeah, definitely the traveling in Australia brought a whole new colour palette to me, a whole new way of working with glass. And as I say, light, I think, is very important to me. I'm using opaque colours most of the time. That started when I'm trying to get deep forms and I'm trying to get the colour coming up to the top of the vessel. In the more flat forms, the powders work really well. Their colour stays. but where I'm drawing is where I want that light to come through. This was, again, an Australian-inspired piece after a train trip from Perth to Sydney. So 4.5 days on a train and looking out at the desert of Australia. And then up to recent work. So I think those residencies have helped teach me how to sit down and bring a body of work into life. And I've just kind of continued on that way of working since that last residency. That was a few days, well, it wasn't, no, a few months before the pandemic. So things have been quite quiet since then. I have definitely reduced the amount of work that I'm making, and I've really kind of honed my galleries down to the kind of ones I really want to work with. This piece was a commission. I don't do commissions very often, but this was for a couple I've known for a long time. It was their 10-year wedding anniversary, and this is oyster capture. So I love taking mostly birds, I would say, and kind of not physically dissecting them, but dissecting out the colours and the form and making it quite a monumental piece, even when it's just based on one bird. You might, I don't think you have oyster, maybe down south you might have oyster catchers, but they're a wonderful bird. I was invited by Jason Falk at PGC to be part of this amazing exhibition. It featured Nathan Sandberg, Joanna Manousis, Nancy Callan, Corey Pemberton, and Mel Douglas. I mean, it was quite a lineup, and I felt very honoured to be there. So again, I wanted to make some kind of quite monumental work. This is, again, that large-scale oval form work. And over the years, I think my drawing has become more important. So I do a lot of prep work with the drawing first. This is obviously the glass, but I'm working with drawing, either fine pen, watercolour pens. Again, I'm still using light. So I love Japanese paper and how translucent it is. So I'm still trying to work out about how my layers are working and how this will translate into the glass. Again, they take a long, long time, but I'm just fascinated with these tiny marks and how they show movement and how they connect. These pieces were called subatomic, so I'm getting back into my kind of my science world, and these are very much about the idea of atoms coming together and making bigger chemical what's gone? Elements. There we go, elements. And that's from the back of the piece looking out through this one. So it's always very different back and front for me. So you can see how that's working. And then these ones, these were particles. So actually physically using the little vessel forms from really tiny little apertures. They were 4 centimetres up to about a 13 centimetre aperture here, and building them together. And then this one, very lucky, you might recognise this picture as it's on the front of the Bullseye catalogue at the moment. So I'm very honoured about that. That was quite, it just worked out in time that I had all these images taken for that exhibition, and they were just perfect. So thank you, Bullseye. This is Northern Hemispheres. So after working with the Southern Hemispheres work, I thought about the differences between the Southern and the Northern, and how cold and more dark I feel that the Northern Hemisphere is. This one, Vessel Gallery, have actually just sold to, I can't pronounce it, I'll have to read it. It's the Ersting Glass Museum in Germany. So a wonderful relationship with galleries, how they do that and how they connect us to the outside world that I wouldn't have chance here in the middle of Scotland. And another Northern Hemisphere piece. So I'm trying to work, changing the form, still using the same technique of a gravity formed piece, but playing with how it moves through that aperture and how it lands as it's coming through. And then my last big show was called We Are Crow. This is at the Scottish Gallery in Edinburgh. And this is all based on the poems of Ted Hughes. Again, going back to birds and the amazing illustrations from Skin or Leonard Baskin. So again, drawing. I always start drawing, thinking about patterns, colours at that stage. This is all thinking about the chaos of Crow, which these two, I focused on two of these poems from the 1970s book. And in the middle of all that, I had a residency at Pilcher, connecting again with Steve Klein and Richard Parrish. Unfortunately, I only got to half of it because I got COVID for the first time getting into Portland. So I had just worked on drawings when I was at Pilchuck, but it was such an honour to be there. That was my first time, so I'd really like to go back and do that properly again. But again, lots more research, understanding Crow and how he's running through the universe and trying to work out in the poems, what God has created. I was travelling down from Pilchuck back to Portland, but I stopped in at the Tacoma Glass Museum, and as we were walking around the back streets, I found a dead crow. I think he'd flown into overhead cables or something, but I just had to investigate him because he was so beautiful, and it was amazing to see them up close. Because this body of work was all based on poems, I wanted to introduce some words into my work, which I'd never done. And so I was doing some powder printing. So this is my kind of very dodgy handwriting, but I wanted it to be quite chaotic. As I'm drawing that powder across the screen, I'm overlaying them and putting them in different positions. And this would be the first firing of this piece. Then once that's fired, I flip that over, and then I'm drawing into just the pure black powder on the top here. That gets fired. This one's a very low fire. I wanted like physical texture of like the feathers. And this is the piece after it's been slumped. And then after all the cold working. This is just to show you a little bit of close-up of those textures, those low-fired textures. And it's kind of taking me back to my roots when I was doing a lot more physical engraving, engraving into the sheet glass, the cameo engraving and showing the colours underneath. But with that low fire, you get this lovely texture, especially with those dark colours. You get a little bit of melting, but you get a lot of, you can really trace those feathers as you move across the piece. This is a piece from that same body of work that was in the British Glass Biennale. Again, using that kind of really low-fired texture on the middle and a much, much smoother piece on the outside. Another variation of work. This was one of my favourites. It comes from the poem Crow and the Birds. And the last line of the poem, after all these beautiful descriptions of lots of other birds, was crow, head down in beach garbage, guzzling ice cream. So this is Crow and the ice cream. For this exhibition, I really wanted some 2D work. So this is my flatbed kiln, which is about 1 metre by 80 centimetres. So this is almost a full sheet of texture there. And this is the under kind of drawing, and it's only half of the work. And this is what I do all the time. I actually had to get onto the bench because this one was so big, and to actually get into the drawing and not, wipe your arm right the way through it. I had to be right next to it. So this takes hours and hours of work. This is a tiny little scalpel that I'm drawing into the powders here. And I don't know if you can hear that. That's just me, my little tapping down, because I'm drawing right down to that sheet glass base. This is it in progress. So you can see why it takes a lot of hours. Every little mark of that has just been made by a scalpel. The hardest piece of glass to ever photograph, and luckily I didn't do it. But it's a piece that you have to move around because I'm working with that lo-fi texture again, and as you walk, the whole piece shimmers. And this was thinking about crow. It's the same wingspan as a crow, so it's about 1 meter by 20 across. So a crow could fly through that, and it's him flying through the dark matter and trying to understand the universe with all these feathers flying as he's going through it. Oh, sorry. And I thought I would just finish with a very large piece being taken off the rim. I shall just scoop forward. So, large piece. Sometimes I cut on the outside, sometimes I cut on the inside. This one I'm doing the inside because it just gives me a little bit more strength through my wrist. There's a Sharpie line all the way around that I'm following. It kind of shows you the scale of the work. And also I do most of the stuff, all my cold working by hand. So I score the piece all the way around. It looks quite fiddly. Skip on. So I carefully go all the way around, and then I'm tapping out that score line. I'm trying to release that pressure from the frame into the vessel. That takes quite a long time. This was all done in real time, and I think this took about 7 minutes. I'm still tapping on the outside here. Just want to get to the bit where I turn it over. Oh, I missed it. No, still missed it. Where is it? So once I've gone all the way around, turn the piece back down flat, and then I use my hammer. I think I'm just seeing whether it will come out. Sometimes when I don't have pattern on the back of the piece, they kind of almost fall off the frame. But when they've got powder front and back, it's a bit harder. So the hammer is kind of helping that score line open. I'm not whacking it. I'm just very carefully tapping it all the way around, and I'm listening to the glass because the tone of the glass will change. This one I don't think came off as cleanly. But I think I just lost a little bit of the frame first and just had to take that off. They could be a bit tricky, but this is after, several weeks worth of work, building the blank, slumping the piece. I often slump in two slumps for one piece as well. So I'm always really cautious at this point because it could all go terribly wrong. And then it's off. So a few little high points that I just cold worked down, and then it's sandblasted because this is far too shiny for me. And then that's the piece after cold working. This is based on heron bird. And that was, he was mentioned in the Crow and the Birds poem. So. And I think that is me.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Really fascinating work. Really appreciate you taking us through that process. I also want to thank again our 3 sponsors for this program, Rago Wright Auctions, which has a lot of wonderful auctions, particularly on contemporary art glass. Vessel Gallery in London, who has represented Amanda Simmons and her work for over a decade, and of course, Bullseye Glass. And I know a lot of you had some technical questions during the program, so I just want to remind everyone that Amanda has some wonderful classes coming up through by online. So if you would really like to delve into this process, I encourage you to visit that link that Ted Sawyer put in the chat, and you can sign up for one of her classes, including there's one starting tomorrow. We do have a few more questions I would like to get to, Amanda. One was about printmaking. They said, when you mentioned printmaking, did you mean screening powders or stampings, or by what means were you referring to that?
So the way I use printmaking, either like a lino cut or working from wood, plywood panels. Um, so it's definitely the printmaking that you print onto paper. I have done screen printing, but I find it quite fiddly making screens. You could see there in the presentation, mine are a little bit rough, but I don't mind that because it was working with the thing. But no, the lino cut and the Japanese technique it's very similar to how I work with glass. So the way I put the powders down, the mark making, and the layering of those, and the printmaking just helps me work all that through without using the glass. It answers a lot of questions for me. So I'm in the process at the moment of actually bringing that out as a full practice. So I'm doing a master's in fine art at the moment, and so I'm working on all those things that normally inform my glass, but no one ever gets to see them. So hopefully they'll come out at some point.
Okay. And another question, can you talk about your creative journey and how it combines with your scientific curiosity to constantly be in a state of movement into new directions? Have you thought about the way you continue to be thinking about new challenges and looking for them?
That's a really good question, and one I'd probably like to think about a bit more. But I think because I left the like two good careers basically as a scientist. I mean, both of them I could have gone on and done more things with, but I always felt that I was catching up. So I didn't find glass until I was 30. So I think I was quite determined to make it work. Also, because I chose kiln-form glass, I was also really wanted to bring that um, well, to make it more popular, but also to make it be taken more seriously. As I think at that point, it was very much a hobbyist thing in the UK, and there weren't really any kiln formers apart from cast, that cast work. There weren't kiln formers in kind of the top galleries. So I'm quite stubborn and I'm quite determined to make things work. And I was lucky. When I found glass, it was just everything I wanted it to be. I tried every other medium possible, everything from stone carving to jewelry to oil painting. What medium I didn't try, welding, but it was that first little thing that we did when we melted the glass that just completely hooked me. So I think that it's just come naturally, the creativity. I'm working with a medium that I love, and I'm also trying to, I think, as I said at the beginning, trying to make it do things it doesn't want to do. So we're both being stubborn with each other, So, but when it works, it's brilliant, and that's what keeps you going. I think the residency and why I focused on the residencies for this talk how that creativity is led back into the work. I found that it's quite difficult to do on your own in the middle of nowhere. Also, why I've gone back to the masters, because I'm finding that hard to bring the other work out instead of the glass. But no, I think I'd like to think about that question for a lot longer. But it's
Well, you
just a
did.
natural curiosity, I think,
Yeah. Well, you did mention something that resonated when you were talking about your residencies and how it really sort of forced you to just kind of stop. And I think that's something really important for makers and artists is that, you do get in this rhythm when you're in your studio where you have a lot of commitments and obligations and you have to produce. And it's so important to give yourself permission to just stop and to do the research and to do the investigation and all of that. So it's wonderful that you've had all of those opportunities.
Absolutely. Yeah. And clay. I think clay is important.
And we did have a question also about your bullseye class. Can you share how the class works? Is there a bit of mold making or engraving? How do you try things alongside the lessons?
So delicate disco is really all about the practice that I've from the beginning of powders through to how I work now. So it's looking at three techniques. We haven't run it for a year, so we've just had a rehearsal. So it's looking at different techniques that I've shown you in the work today. We go through those sky forms, so the less mark making process. I call it a compression technique because I'm actually flattening the powders and I'm moving them. We look at the double layered technique, which is what all my work is. So all of that. So this is just like a larger version of what we would do in class. And I look at the low fire texture as well. So I've brought in kind of more recent ways of working with powder that I do to get texture. And we do a technique where we actually fuse and slump at the same time and create vessel forms with just one firing. So it's quite intense, and it's not for the faint-hearted because the work is, that's why it's called delicate disco. It's the work is very fine, and it's working with how I because of those bird and those little lightweight kind of feelings I want to get from the vessels. But saying that, it can all be changed. It can all be made slightly more substantially if you need to. So it's a 4-week course, and that we I think why it works really well online is that you have me through the week and also the sport from Bullseye. So it's a month-long class, but it kind of continues after each session, and we get to show and see everybody's work, what they're making on. So we try to make it like a collective class, how you would do in person. So and online, that's not always easy, but I think we've done it pretty well at Bullseye now.
Yeah, sounds like a tremendous learning experience. And I see also someone in the chat that's going to be taking a class with you in August in, let's see, the Glass Underground. So I'm not sure where that's located, but you have a student looking forward to that. So thank you again, Amanda, for being with us. Again, I believe the web address is classes.bullseyeglass.com. I hope I have that correct. It is in the chat. So you can go ahead and click on that if you are interested in taking a class with Amanda. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. And if people would like to stay on, they can unmute themselves and say hello. Thank you again, Amanda, so much for being with us. Wonderful to have you.
Thank you for the invite and for everybody to come today. Thank you ever so much.